Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Tiny Fit Diva podcast. I'm Kylene Terhune, your host, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. It's my job to uncover the hidden causes of chronic illness and help you achieve optimal health. I'm super excited today to introduce you to Dr. Erika Gray, PharmD, co-founder of ToolboxGenomics. She has a PharmD from University of California at San Francisco and worked as a pharmacist at a level 1 trauma center in both the inpatient pharmacy and emergency room. Her experiences in the emergency room of seeing the terrible manifestation of chronic diseases and helping patients understand their biomarkers in relationship to their health paved the way for co-founding ToolboxGenomics, which I'm super excited to talk about. So welcome, Erika. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's lots of fun.
I know it. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What's your history? How did you get to the place where you wanted to co-found something as awesome as Toolbox?
Well, thank you. So I was born and raised in Southern California, and unbeknownst to me, my parents were actually pretty avant-garde when it came to taking care of their health, and they always took a bunch of supplements. And so I grew up being handed supplements in the morning. Here, sweetie, take this. You take your vitamin C. And my mom read Linus Pauling's book and said, oh, you got to take a lot of vitamin C because, humans are one of the only species next to guinea pigs that don't make their own vitamin C. And like the average goat makes 10 grams of vitamin C. So I was like, wow, for that little goat or some big goats, that's actually quite a bit. So she was always really interested in, my mom specifically was interested in health and just eating really well. So, we did the whole whole wheat diet, whole wheat breads and things like that. And I remember going through the grocery store and seeing Wonder Bread.
What's this? What is this white color with colorful bubbles that we see?
Yes. And I used to poke it because we always had to get that brown stuff. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I'd asked my mom, I said, can we get that? And her go-to was read the ingredients. And if there's no high fructose corn syrup and, there isn't, and it had to be actual whole wheat flour in it, then we could buy it. But of course she knew, and I was clueless at that point, that Wonder didn't have that. And so that was always like her go-to. But I remember saying, when I'm 16, I'm going to eat Wonder Bread, I'm going to drink Sprite, and I'm going to chew gum, because those are like the 3 things that she wouldn't let me do. And that was my food rebellion. But then fast forward to when I was 16, I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And that was a real blow. It started off as just having 2 ruptured ovarian cysts. I had no idea what was going on. I had a lot of pain. But I was really fatigued. And so I just couldn't finish school. I'd come home from my classes and just curl up in a ball on the couch. And it was really frustrating because I wanted to do well. I wanted to get through my classes and be successful, but I couldn't. So long story short, ended up with the diagnosis. And then I had a surgery, and then they put me on birth control pills, which I did not do well with. And more on that genetically when we get to it. And then they went ahead and I had another surgery 3 months later. And after that, my mom said, okay, we really need to figure out what's going on. So she took me to our chiropractor, who's also a nutritionist. And he said, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to cut out all breads and pastas. So even though we were eating whole wheat, I thought that was the better way to do it. And as a water polo player, I ate a ton of carbs, for breakfast and then also for dinner. And lots of green vegetables, some protein, a lot of fat, and no sugar. And of course, my mom and I looked at each other and said, what are we going to eat? And it was really that day of reckoning of, I needed to now start changing things. And I did, and I started putting it into practice. And then I got a 3rd relapse of endometriosis in under a year. And then no one would do surgery on me. And I went into my OB/GYN and said, please, if you just do the surgery, I feel so much better. The instant I wake up, all the pain's gone and I can get on with my life. And she said, no, you're 16. We can't do 3 surgeries in a year. So our nutritionist said, well, why don't you work with this other OBGYN who actually prescribes natural progesterone? Because at this point, we've tested my levels. We find I have a lot of estrogen, not enough progesterone, which is kind of a common setting, shall we say, for the development of endometriosis. So I started taking natural progesterone. I ended up stopping my periods altogether for 3 years. Then I did clean up my diet because I had to. I didn't have a choice. I was on the couch and no one was going to help me out. So it's really up to me to do it. So I did. And then that's where I really started understanding that and how I live my life in conjunction with, who I am, both genetically and environmentally, really did set the stage for that development of endometriosis, and I could keep it in remission. So that was a really interesting experience. And then from there, people said, you really seem to have a good knack for hormones and understanding this. Why don't you go into pharmacy school? And then I had done a lot with my pharmacist for compounded progesterone that I needed, because I wasn't doing the progestin, which is the synthetic version. This is the progesterone, which is the comes from wild yams. And then after going to pharmacy school, it's like, okay, great, I'm going to help women with hormones. But unfortunately, the financial crash kind of took us off course. So I ended up doing inpatient pharmacy, which was really interesting because it gave me a really good idea of what is standard of care. What do we do for people conventionally? What do we do when we follow guidelines? And what does that look like? And to me, I just found people getting sicker.
Yeah, I mean, truly, they either say we can't help you normally, especially with endometriosis and hormone imbalances. It seems like there's not a lot of solutions in the conventional medicine practice, and unless they hand you birth control, and that's about it.
Right. Or they decide to do the Depo-Provera shots, which are the next ones, which are the long-lasting progestin shots. But I find a lot of women end up being put on a lot of antibiotics because I think they're thinking there's an inflammatory infection component, which is just going to wreck your gut dysbiosis, which is going to make it harder for you to break down estrogen.
Right.
To make it worse.
Oh gosh, wow. So really intense personal experiences is kind of what led you down, the information rabbit hole of figuring out what actually contributes to that. Wow.
Yes. So then of course it was my mom who's one day said, I did my 23andMe. What do you think? And then that's when I started looking into it, getting some more information for her. She goes, okay, wow, this is really interesting. And I was blown away with just how much data was out there to support nutrigenomics. So that interaction of nutrition and our genes, and epigenetics, which is our environment and how it interacts with our genes. And then she said, okay, here's your dad's. And I looked and she said, I'm a little concerned about that marker. And I looked and he's a carrier for Alzheimer's disease. Mm. And that's when I go, oh, wow, now we actually have a real personal, I have a personal motivation here. Mm. And he was really good natured about it. So I told him, he goes, okay, well, what do I do? And I was like, oh, shoot, I need to actually go into the literature and figure out what to do. And then come to find out that everyone wanted this, that nobody knew. They had all this great information, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to put it into practice. And so that's how Toolbox got co-founded with a ER nurse friend of mine who was getting her MBA.
That's super amazing. So I want to talk about Toolbox. I want to go back to you really quickly. Can we talk about, how are you feeling now? What kind of changes did you implement? What kind of results did you see from those changes as you kind of went down this more holistic route of treatment for yourself?
Yeah. So I would say that the diet really was probably the biggest thing that I could change. Really pulling me off of all those inflammatory carbs and just realizing that our gut plays such a big role in it, in how we can break it down and we can assimilate a lot of these different foods that we take in, was really, really interesting. I have felt great once I stopped my period for 3 years. And I don't recommend that anyone does that unless you are working very closely with a healthcare professional, because it then took me a long time to get my cycle back. And I actually had to go back and do a whole bioidentical hormone protocol to get my cycle where it needed to be. I did end up having 2 children successfully, which was really exciting because a lot of people with endometriosis struggle with that. And it's heartbreaking because it's a huge cause of infertility.
Mm.
And after that, that pregnancy did normalize everything. And I've had normal cycles and everything's been great. The interesting thing has been that with the startup and just all of the stress, I have seen my cycles start shortening again. And so from past experience, I know that my progesterone levels are just not always where they need to be. And progesterone just gets used up so easily in times of stress. And then if it's not even that high normally, and genetically I'm a slow estrogen metabolizer. So my estrogen sticks around longer. I just don't break it down as quickly. So I really need that extra progesterone to help support it. And what I have found is just by putting in things like Vitex, which is chasteberry, to help increase some progesterone levels, that's helped me. I can see my cycle starting to get slowly pushed out. And it's only been a couple days that it got shortened. But again, I can tell that trajectory of where I'm going. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very interesting. And I just have to be mindful of how much fat I take in, even though it's great, it's super helpful. I have some of the genes that don't allow me to transport fat around quite as easily as some other people. So a keto diet it's not going to be for me. That I will gain weight. I tried it and 10 pounds came on immediately.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. We're all very different. And so these diets work for some people, but not for everybody, for sure.
Yes, and it may work for you for a short period of time. So like a therapeutic intervention is what we would call it. So for some people, they would say, but keto really worked well for me. And that's true. Like 2 months, great. But then after that, you need to think about in terms of a longevity plan, what is going to be the thing that's going to complement your genes versus working against them.
Mm-hmm. Which is where ToolboxGenomics comes in, right? So that's what your website does. You get like a 23andMe, or you get a genetic test done, and then you end up at home as a regular person with these results, and you say, what the heck does this mean? How do I utilize this to help my health or to hack my body, right? So that's what your website does, right?
Yeah, so now actually we have our own testing kit. And so the beauty of that is you swab once, and now you've got 4 different tests that open up to you. And you can pick and choose what you would like. You can get one report today. You can get another one next week. You can get another one in 3 weeks. It's up to you.
Amazing.
So we have one around nutritional deficiencies. We have one around how we interact with our food and diet, which include our metabolic rates, because it's a little bit different. How successful we're going to be in terms of adhering to a diet. How do we handle high protein? How do we handle low carb? Taste preferences. We actually genetically are impacted by our genetics impact our taste receptors. So some people are super sensitive to bitter, and because they have the genes for it, they're those super tasters. So you tell them, go eat a lot of Brussels sprouts and cruciferous vegetables because it's so good for you, and they just want to die.
Oh my goodness, that's so interesting that's a genetic tendency.
It is. And so, and again, I think over time we can learn to work with some of these bitter tastes because we can roast them, or we can put balsamic vinegar on and it makes it more palatable. Mm-hmm. When you think about children, they go, oh, it's awful, I can't stand it. Or the classic is, a wife is a super taster and a husband isn't, and he's not sensitive to bitter. So he loves IPAs and black coffee and Earl Grey tea. And meanwhile, she says, that's awful. And it's not something personally, it's actually that you're so much more sensitive or less sensitive on those taste buds. It really bothers you. And so, you have to play with that. So it's really interesting. So that's our Thrive product. That's in there. And then we also have our Run DNA. So that is for people who are interested in more endurance type information, what types of exercises, when should you work out, how motivated are you, what types of workouts are going to work best for you. So some people...
Wow, and this is all based on your DNA. So you can tell you should do endurance, you should do not endurance, you should do high intensity, you should do weightlifting. You can kind of tell that from your genes. Wow, super cool.
So it's really interesting because here I was thinking that high intensity workouts are great because I was at 4 minutes and you're done. And I looked through my report and I don't have a sprinter or a power gene to be found. I have all endurance.
Nice.
I was really sad because I said, well, shoot, now I can't get my workouts done quickly. But for some reason, I think we always think endurance, I have to go run 5 miles.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've just started doing bar classes where you can make them more endurance, and you just have to really commit to those longer sets. And that is an endurance workout. So this idea that you have to be out biking or running or swimming massive distances is not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think when you do that, then your body is going to work much better and you're going to see better results too.
So for you personally, do you notice like you physically and emotionally respond better to that type of exercise?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
So there's a little bit of that where people can, if they're able to listen to their body and kind of pay attention enough that maybe they can kind of tune into what their body actually likes. And that's sort of their genetics talking to them. But if they've tried everything and they're like, well, I kind of like everything, this test can really help them zone in on what's going to be most effective for them.
Exactly. And
Cool.
you can pretty much take anything and make it endurance, right? So if you're a weightlifter, you're going to lift lighter but longer. So maybe you're not going to do those really heavy weights. And again, that's not saying that you exclusively have to be endurance. You can insert some of those higher intensity ones, but that is probably not going to be the forte of what you're going to work on. Or even just, motivation. You have some people, they'll tell you, if I am not at the gym at 5 a.m., I feel miserable and I don't know what I'm going to do. And then other people say, just to get out the door is an effort. And sometimes that just boils down to this one gene called BDNF, and it has to do with how motivated you can be. So if you know you're someone who just doesn't really get motivated that easily, then you need to work that much harder at setting up a routine. And whether it's a buddy system where you text that person because I'm out the door, I'm doing it, you put your clothes at the foot of the bed, whatever it is that you need to do to make it happen. I think those people do much better with that. And then they meet their goals and then they feel more motivated and then they feel better. So it's a nice cascade system versus other people like my husband's like, I'm off to the gym. I got to go. So, okay, that's great. I wish I would say, oh, well, I got to make dinner. I got to pick up the kids. And so then the workout gets pushed to the side.
Right. Do you see a lot of consistencies between the differences between men and women? Because my husband's the same way. He's like, well, if I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., he's like, I'm out the door, I hit the gym. And so I feel like men tend towards that direction. And I don't know if that's genetic or personality, but seems a little more consistent for them to be a little more responsive to that.
That's a good question. I don't know. I think sometimes it also boils into a little bit of the COMT gene, which is how you break down dopamine. Sometimes there's what they call the warrior versus the worrier. The worrier does not break down their dopamine as quickly. So in times of stress, they tend to feel even more stressed. Versus the warrior breaks down their dopamine a lot faster and serotonin too sometimes. So they actually need to do things to get those higher levels of dopamine. They tend to do more extreme sports or live an extreme lifestyle because they're trying to get that additional dopamine to come through. So I don't know if that plays into it. I also don't know if just as women and especially if we're mothers, it's hard for us to compromise our family versus the workout. I think we feel that the family has to come first. I think our husbands know that. I think and it's not like we've discussed this. It's kind of like on an unspoken level.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of the lifestyle factors come into play for sure.
Yes.
Did we hit all 4? I think you said you have nutritional, metabolic, run DNA, and then was there a 4th one?
There's a 4th one called Empower. So that is a conglomeration of kind of all 3 tests. Plus, we've got a couple aging markers in there. And so, aging and inflammation. And so that's just it's going to come from another panel that we're going to put together. But for people who just didn't quite know what they wanted, then they can choose that one, and then it hits all the top areas across the different panels.
That's amazing.
I should say different
products. And that's all from a swab, you said. So it's super
all
easy.
From a swab. Yeah.
You don't have to spit in a cup.
Nothing wrong with that.
I would say spitting in a cup, that sometimes is such a pain. It takes like 20 minutes to collect those tests.
Exactly. And I have to say, we do not do anything with your data. So you get to tell us what you want to do with your data. If at any point you just want that to go into a black box and it can never be touched, you can tell us that. And so we want to honor everybody's privacy, that it's their data and they call the shots on that.
That's awesome. So let's talk about epigenetics and nutrigenomics. So the concept that you might have these genes, you might have these tendencies, but certain ones you can turn on or you can turn off. So what's, the impact we have through nutrition or lifestyle, and maybe some specific genes that are more flexible, I guess you'd say, in terms of, hey, we have a lot of control over these.
Yes. So let's talk about epigenetics first, because that's the one that really gets a lot of notoriety. So the notion of epigenetics is that we have these genes, and the way we interact with our environment, so it's this very fluid construct, causes things to happen with these genes. And so the big things that a lot of times that we look at with genes is methylation. So methylation is essentially the addition of a carbon with 3 hydrogens on it, and we just plop it onto the DNA in different spots. And we want it to go on, and they're called markers. And it's almost, and it truly is like, it's just a little hashtag or a little / or something that goes on your DNA. And depending on where you put them, when the DNA gets copied, it can skip over these parts that are methylated. So let's say there's a part that the body says, I just don't like that part of the DNA, because maybe it's going to code for something bad, or that's not going to be helpful. So it'll just, put its little methyl groups on, and then it skips over it and keeps going. So one of the thoughts behind the development of cancer is actually we are hypomethylators. So you don't have enough methyl groups. And as a result, we're copying parts of DNA that should not be copied. So the thing with that is that depending on where this hypomethylation can be happening, whether it's happening in our ovaries with our eggs or in our sperm, now these cells are now going to get transmitted to our offspring. So we've heard a lot about, if your grandmother smoked, you have a higher incidence of developing asthma. So it's 2 generations, because when grandma smoked, essentially it caused certain things to happen to the DNA, aka these little markers were put on. So now as they get transferred down through the generations, those generations are receiving either activated or inactivated parts of DNA. And now you might have to work a little bit harder to overcome that. There's another one where they talked about the Swedish famine, and they actually looked at men this time versus women, and they found that boys who went through famines went right when their sperm was developing, so 9, 10, 11 years of age, actually had better outcomes as far as diabetes or heart disease, ironically, versus the ones who had feasting time had kind of transmitted this abundance messaging in their DNA. And so their grandchildren actually had a higher incidence of coronary artery disease and diabetes. So very interesting, because that was being passed along through the sperm versus the ovaries and with the eggs. So that is kind of the thing that we need to remember. And I think, especially as women, unfortunately, because our eggs do not change over time, we're born with them. That bath that they are in is really important for us to make sure that it is ideal, to keep it well nurtured, because if it's not, we are going to start making these little tweaks within our DNA, within the bath that it's in, and that may get passed on to future generations. So a lot of times people refer to the MTHFR gene, which has to do with folate metabolism. And the reason we care about that so much is folate is needed for sustaining a healthy pregnancy, preventing neural tube defects. Pretty much the laundry list of what is associated with MTHFR is 20 conditions long because they all depend on folate. So folate ends up going into the cell, and then you can make neurotransmitters out of it. It helps with methylation. It helps with detox. All of these different areas. So if we don't have this form of folate that the cells need, then all of these different cellular cycles are impacted. So one of the big ones is like DNA repair. So there's a really interesting paper that looked at the role of folate in skin cancer, because if folate's one of its primary roles is how to repair DNA breakage. So if we think about the development of cancer or skin cancer in this situation, it's because your DNA is broken and now it's getting replicated instead of it being fixed. And folate can play a big role in that fixing and that stabilizing, along with some of the other B vitamins as well. So for example, riboflavin actually helps support and balance MTHFR. So the thing with MTHFR that people need to know, you eat folate from your food, or you take folic acid, or hopefully not folic acid, but a methylated form, an activated form of folate. It goes through your cell cycles and then it stops at the very last little gate, and that's where the enzyme MTHFR lives. And what it does is it takes that form of folate and turns it into the final form that the cell can use. So essentially, is that once it's in that form, the cell doors open and it can now go in and do its job. But if you have a variation in that enzyme, that it doesn't work as well. And so it's very slow to make that conversion. So you get this pile up of usually a folic acid. So this is where it can be oxidized and it hangs out in the blood. But meanwhile, inside the cell, it's starving. So this is one that, again, it's easy to support, it's easy to modify, because you can just take a supplement which bypasses this problematic enzyme. So you're looking for something that has the words methyl in it, or L-methyl, and that's usually tetrahydrofolate for the supplement, which can be very helpful. And I would say make sure you work with a healthcare practitioner, because some people will need higher doses depending on what you need. But for most people, usually it's a low dose. 400, 600 micrograms is probably all they're going to need. But what's important to realize is that MTHFR works with B12. And so we really care about that, because when folate comes in this cycle, B12 is coming this way. And what they're doing is they're actually going to work together to take homocysteine, which, homocysteine, convert it back into methionine. And the reason we care about that is when we eat animal products, methionine is an amino acid. It's supposed to be there. Our body knows what to do with it, but it does a conversion. It takes methionine and it converts into homocysteine. But if we don't have B12 and we don't have folate, we don't convert it back into methionine. And homocysteine is inflammatory to our vasculature, to our arteries, to our brain. So we need to always make sure we support that so we can keep that level down. And with B12, we have another gene called FUT2, and that really does a lot with our gut. It actually, people who have that variant usually have lower levels of bifidobacteria, so we don't have the same diversity. And you're going to have a little bit of a harder time of utilizing the B12 from your diet. And again, these are all things that you can easily rectify. You can eat fermented foods. You can take a bifido supplement, so you can work around it. But instead of us thinking that, shoot, we have these genes and now we can't do anything about it, we can say, because of these genes and because I know I have these symptoms or I have this lab work, these are the things I can do to help support my journey. And then you asked about modifiable genes. And so I would say that for the most part, you can always support the genes. I think the question is this a gene that is programming for a decrease in an enzyme? Is it a faster enzyme? So for example, for me, the CYP1B1, which helps break down estrogen, I know that because of that, I need to make sure I'm eating cruciferous vegetables. I'm taking indole 3 carbinol. because those are going to be the things that are going to help me break it down, because I know it's a more sluggish enzyme. And the other one, so just going back to my father with ApoE, a lot of people do have that. And it doesn't mean you're going to develop Alzheimer's, but we know that certain key lifestyle things, smoking, drinking, saturated fat, and exercise are kind of the big ones that are really going to impact how quickly this gene is going to kind of keep us on this trajectory. And when you have that ApoE gene, your ability to transport saturated fats just isn't as good. And so it doesn't get to where it needs to be. And then it's now prone to oxidation as well.
So while some people do really well on coconut oil, for somebody that has that gene, that's not the right healthy fat for them. They should be doing something else.
That's right. So there's actually an interesting study, speaking of that, where they looked at coconut oil in people who have the 4 allele, the variant, and they found that they actually didn't benefit from it. But if you were what they call the normal or the wild type, and a 3-3, those people actually did get cognitive benefits from the coconut oil. So, but a 3-4 does very well with omega-3s and shellfish. So those people actually do benefit from those higher levels of omega-3s.
So lots of fish, lots of, krill oil, things like that, supplement with that. You can support your brain. Because, your brain needs fat. But what you're saying is for your gene type, you need to feed yourself the right kinds of fat so you have positive benefits, not negative benefits. That's amazing.
Exactly.
Wow. Exactly. So if someone goes ahead and takes, it was the Empower test that sort of included a lot of information. They're going to get sort of some lifestyle information regarding these genes and what they can do and what symptoms they would have if they're not functioning properly, or what kind of results would you see if you took one of these tests?
Yeah, so the first thing we do is we tell you what can you do from a diet perspective, because we just feel like that is such an easy place for us to make changes. And I think a lot of people say, well, no, duh, it is, but it's really actually implementing it and adhering to it. So easier said than done. So you get that, then you're going to get lifestyle. So there's some markers that we look at that maybe you need to be much more conscientious about your sleep because you're more sensitive to blue light. So you've got to work that much harder on making sure all those little blinking green and blue lights need to be covered up before you go to bed and really sleep in that dark room. Then we also have exercise. So just certain people, like for example, on our healthcare professional version that we're getting ready to launch, for diabetes, we make different recommendations on different exercises that have been studied in pre-diabetics or diabetic patients. And then we also do further testing, because I think it's important for people to realize that just because you have the gene doesn't mean you're going to actually express it. And you might not express it today, but you might express it 20 years from now. So we usually would tell people you should go get a physical every year, but maybe it's more we need to do a little SNP checkup to see what's going on with our genes, what's being expressed currently, because those really can fluctuate especially as we get older.
Can you explain really quickly to everyone what is a SNP? What's that mean?
Yes. So a SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism. So we have genes, and within these genes, so let's take ApoE. So you've got different variations within that, and they have different positions, little sections in the chromosome, and those variations are what we call a SNP. And what it usually means is two things. Either there's a base pair change, so C always is supposed to go with G, but in the case of MTHFR, it's actually C has now been switched to T. So that now tells the body that we actually have to code faster or for a slower or faster enzyme. Other times there's no base pair change, but just because it is a variation, it is now going to code for a different type of the way we metabolize our fat. So that those SNPs are what make me, you, even though we share 99.9% of the same genetic material. It's that 0.1% of that uniqueness is really derived from these SNPs. And usually a lot of them all have,
sorry about that. That was my phone.
Usually there's some type of evolutionary pressure that cause a lot of these things to happen. So just popping back to MTHFR for a second, because so many people have it, but actually the thought process behind it is that the malaria virus flourishes in high folate environments. So our bodies actually were super clever, and they figured out a way for us to not get as much folate into the cells, and then therefore the malaria virus wasn't as successful. But unfortunately, it's now made it a little bit harder for us to combat that. But they're actually really, trying to figure that out in some of the developing countries where there's malaria, is that if we give women folate for pregnancy protection, are we actually increasing their risk of developing malaria?
Yeah, wow. I've heard you talk a little bit about some of these studies historically. I've heard too, when people go through, it's like passing trauma down through generations, which is fascinating. How your emotional state, your mental state affects your physical state. And we can literally, and you've mentioned several different ways this can happen, that you can physically inherit different things from your parents and your grandparents if they went through the depression, if they went through a fasting period because there were some hard times financially, if they went through like a traumatic experience in their life, they may pass some of that on to you. And even away from the genetic side a little bit, some of the emotional difficulties that you struggle with in your own life can sometimes be connected to that. It's so mind-blowing when you get into this stuff. It's like these weird hangups that I have. You mean that could have been because my grandfather was an alcoholic? It's
right.
Nuts.
Oh, no, it's so true. And I think, for some people that can feel overwhelming because you go, oh, well, great, now I'm doomed.
Right. But for weirdos like us, we think it's super cool.
This is great. Now I know what to do.
Right.
But actually some new data coming out, and I don't have the genes, at the top of my head because it's really new, but they're actually looking at there's certain genes that only get activated by trauma, very specific times, so whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse. And I think that's really, really interesting, especially in the world of psychology, because I think a lot of times, people will go to psychologists and they say, but I'm not getting anywhere. And all I've done is just talk. And I feel like I'm just reliving everything over and over again. And so now with the whole aspect of genetics, it makes me go, well, let's go back and maybe just see kind of fundamentally where you are, because you may have these genes that are just making you much more trigger happy or sensitive. And if we know how to support those, now maybe your therapy is going to be much more successful. That's just my theory.
And think about this. You just said that trauma can actually activate certain genes. If you're going to therapy and you're not feeling better and you're reliving it, that's like turning those on over and over again. And so you're just like cementing that into your physical memory. That's kind of scary, actually, if you think about it that way. No more therapy for me. No. Have you ever heard of emotional code therapy?
No.
So this is fascinating. And for people that are thinking about genetics, this might actually be something worth looking into in terms of kind of releasing some things and moving on without the drama. I did 2 emotional code therapy sessions, and at first, I thought this was super bizarre, but I actually think it's a really interesting way to have therapy. What it is based on muscle testing. So if you're familiar with like kinesiology, but what's crazy about this, and this is where it gets super weird, and you have to really be open to the concept that energy is real and we can connect to other people's energy, and that physiologically, like, that's possible in order for this to actually work. But because she did it with me over the phone the first time, and it's based on muscle testing, and she's muscle testing me through the phone. Which,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, blew my mind. I was like, are you like a psychic or something? Because everything she was talking about was so accurate. But emotional code therapy, what's so interesting about it is because of muscle testing, the concept is that your body knows, your subconscious can't lie. So if you're doing muscle testing, you can ask me a question, is your name Kylene? I can say no verbally and, maybe get away with it if I don't flinch or whatever. But if you say, is your name Kylene? And I say no, and you muscle test me, my body can't lie, and it's going to be weaker. The energy that produces a lie is weaker. And so that's sort of the overall energetic theory there. But she's muscle testing me through the phone, and the first session was identifying your heart wall, which is these held emotions that are more or less like negative emotions that you need to be able to release. They're, blocking your heart, I guess is why you'd call it the heart wall. So we actually identified, I think, like 21 or something like that, different emotions.
Gosh.
Yeah. And what was nuts about it is, you can relate to a lot of these, but if you can't, she can do further muscle testing to identify sort of what period of your life it was from, and or if it was from you or if it was inherited. So some of the ones where I was like, I don't know so much about this one. She's like, all right, let's dig into it. Okay, this is actually from your grandfather's side, your grandfather on your mother's side or whatever. And, he was da, 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 da. And I was like, yep, that makes sense. That totally resonates with me. And that's, that makes it just fit. But what's so nice about the concept of emotional code therapy is you identify all these things very quickly, very accurately, and then at the end you release them. And you did not have to go through 6 months of traumatic reliving, talking through the horrible experiences that you had, and crying. And it's just talking about genetics here and how certain emotions can activate genes. That's kind of an interesting correlation. I thought I'd throw that out there as an interesting thought for people to maybe work through some of that stuff.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because there's the emotional freedom tapping, the EFT.
Yep.
And we did that with my daughter because she just had a lot of trauma. I shouldn't say trauma, but fear about, she felt like she was going to be abandoned. And it was really hard for her. We would drop her off at a class and she'd, don't leave me, don't leave me. I said, but the teachers, the class, this is not foreign for you. And we did that EFT, and it was just an incredible thing to watch for her to really dig in. And for her, it was just, she was terrified of being abandoned, and she couldn't put her finger on that. But that whole process really helped her identify and then release it. And after that, she was completely fine. Now 2 weeks sleepaway camp. Bye, Mom. Love you. I'll miss you. But I'm okay. I'm fine to go and do it. And the ultimate was this year, she was the one comforting all the children who are homesick. And I was just so proud of her. But, and again, kind of knowing that, then I can also go back and look at her genetics and see where some other areas maybe I need to support her as far as dopamine pathways. She breaks hers down faster like I do, but my husband and son break it down a lot slower. So it's so interesting. Even the personalities and how they come through are manifested. And my son used to say, oh, my brain hurts. This is so hard. When I would give him something hard, I thought, come on, your brain doesn't hurt. And then when I realized, well, actually you're a slow COMT, which means that your dopamine stays, you can't break it down as much. You can't break down these catecholamines like norepinephrine and epinephrine. So me putting more work on you and come on, let's do it, is actually increasing your stress level, which is just making that worse, which could make your brain hurt. So, okay. All right, just do one thing. Can you do one thing? Yes. Okay.
The benefit of having a smart mom right there. So, can you talk a little bit about like your microbiome, like what, the bacteria in your gut and how that affects your brain in a positive or negative way, and gene expression and all that fun stuff?
Yeah. So my favorite study that just recently came out was a twin study where they looked at twins, and twins are great because you actually have your own built-in control. And they looked at the different gut biomes of these different twins, and they used identical twins. So again, same genetic material, but then they have different life experiences and what came out of that. And there's an olfactory gene for cilantro. And so people who have the variant feel cilantro tastes like soap. So my grandmother has that, and it was the proverbial thing growing up. My mom always used to tell my dad, don't put cilantro in it. Your mom will eat it. She thinks it tastes like soap. And we all thought my grandmother was just being difficult because that isn't her personality. And she was just saying that to do it until we found out she actually had the gene. I was like, oh, there we go. But then I would look at other people and they had the variant. They said, well, cilantro doesn't taste like soap, but I don't love it. And they would say, well, if I plug my nose, I can actually eat cilantro. So again, validating the whole thing, it's an olfactory gene. But it turns out that there's actually a bacteria in our gut that activates that gene. And so the theory behind it is that depending on what bacteria we have, it may or may not be activating this particular olfactory gene. But the bacteria really do seem to be like these master switches in the backdrop that we don't realize. And what's super cool is that we actually have bacteria in our colon that make folate, they make B12, they make biotin, they make riboflavin. So I actually think that nature is, and our bodies are so smart, they acknowledge that a lot of people have this MTHFR gene. They can't get folate into the cells as well. So they go, no problem. We have actually a backdoor strategy where the bacteria are going to make these necessary neurotransmitters. They're going to make these B vitamins. And then we actually have these special transporters and these special genes that code for these transporters that get it straight into the cell. And you don't actually have to go through all of these different conversions that you do with some of the food products. And it's really, really a great way for you. I think it's like an insurance policy. If you have a good, robust gut, you're going to have more flexibility. And so you're like those people who say, I can eat anything. I have a stomach of iron. Mm-hmm. So those people usually never have a variant in FUT2. They never have any of the different B12 issues, because a lot of B12 conversion and absorption all happens in the gut. They usually will have less nutrient deficiency SNPs as well. And they usually are faster alcohol metabolizers and faster caffeine metabolizers.
I'm telling you right now, that's my husband.
Yeah.
And whatever he is, I'm the opposite of that.
And that's usually the case. And so it's not that they have a stomach of iron, so to speak. They happen to have this combination of genes and gut bacteria that really enable them to be much more flexible. Now, I would argue that that flexibility is not going to last you your entire life, especially if you do not help support those bacteria. Mm-hmm. But there's just so much where we're talking that if you have 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria, taking a 10 billion colony forming unit of probiotics once a day is probably not going to be enough to really shift that. You would probably have to take a lot more for a longer period of time. Mm-hmm. But what I found out for myself personally was I thought I was super sensitive to gluten. I took myself off of all gluten, would go back and eat it, and my nose would just run and my knees would ache. So it's like, oh, clearly this is really inflammatory for my body. Started taking probiotics, but really aggressively, where I was taking 800 or 900 billion colony forming units, 800 million colony forming units, which is a high dose. That's something that I figured out for myself. So I don't recommend everyone jumps to that high of a dose. But what I found was after doing that for 2 months, and if I had some gluten, nothing happened. Now I couldn't do it aggressively.
Down and
right. And so I think a lot of these food allergies that we talk about, and especially genetically, we look at things like HLA, which is our immune complex. A lot of times it is our gut that is really going to trigger that or help us keep it quiet. So we talk about a lot of autoimmune conditions getting started in the gut, and 100%. You pull out those inflammatory foods. Well, by pulling out those inflammatory foods, you're letting those gut microbiome do their job and push you more into an anti-inflammatory state. So really having that good gut is going to help you work better with your genes as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love the two-pronged approach, because you can't just remove stuff. You also have to feed the good gut bugs. You have to repair. You have to calm that inflammation. You have to bring all the good stuff back in and make sure you're balanced enough. Because otherwise, when you reintroduce that food, there's still going to be damage. There's still going to be inflammation. Right. You're still going to have a negative reaction. But if you do a lot of the healing work in the process, you can really see good results from that. That's awesome that you're able to sort of self-dose yourself. So did you take like a stool test and find out that your bacteria count was really low, or what? Or just were you sort of guessing there just based on your own expertise, or?
Yeah, so a bunch of research that I did just because of Toolbox, all the reading that I do, but then also just basing it off of my symptoms. And so my mom always used to say, why is your nose stuffy? You always sound like, why are you blowing your nose? And so that was always kind of a tip off for me growing up. And we thought it was dairy, but now I actually think it was probably the gluten. And so that's always my cue is if I don't have to blow my nose isn't running, I'm not breaking out, my knees don't hurt, I'm probably in a good spot. And I can see it. I don't take my probiotics now that I've been doing it for so long. Sometimes I'll take a couple days off. And then on that third day, I go, why am I blowing my nose? Oh, yes, that's right. Time to go back and take them. So
a good PSA for everybody. Sinus problems are not normal.
That's right.
They are common, but they are not normal. I tell people this that get chronic sinus infections on the regular. We need to fix your gut. Something is going on. This is not okay. It's not cool that you're getting these, chronic sinus headaches and all this kind of stuff. That's not normal. Acne is not normal. It's common. It's not normal. Joint pain is common. It's not normal, guys. These are all things that we can affect in a positive way for our nutrition, our lifestyle. If you want to get deep and dig into your genetics, you can find different ways to support yourself. Healing your gut microbiome, all that kind of stuff is how you fix it. And it is fixable. I think that's the thing that I always try to preach to people, is if you don't feel like you're living your best life, and you've kind of settled into this mediocre, well, it's normal, well, I'm aging, well, it's, just everybody gets joint pain kind of thing. No. I mean, a lot of people do, but it doesn't mean you have to. And I think that's why we do the podcast, is so we can kind of, bring in experts and talk about that stuff, because I think the more you hear that you really can have energy, you really can feel better, you really can fix your sinus problems, and the more you might start believing it.
Well, I think the important takeaway for people to realize is that the body loves homeostasis. It wants to improve. It wants to clean up. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we have all kinds of machinery built in called autophagy, which helps us go in and break everything down and rebuild in a better and stronger way. So we almost need to get out of our body's way and let it do what it does best. Easier said than done.
I love that. I love that you said that, because that's exactly what I say. I say your body either usually needs us to take a stressor away, or it needs some assistance, like a probiotic, like a nutrient, something like that. But when you're able to sort of identify that, your body knows what to do. It does. Really, really, really good at being healthy. It just needs.
It wants to be healthy.
It wants to be healthy. Yeah, it's super good at it. Yeah. So thank you so much, Erika. That was just, I just feel like we could go on for hours and talk about genes, and you're so informative and helpful in breaking it down in a way that we can understand. So I really appreciate that. So where can people find you? Where can they get the testing, and how can they connect with you?
So you can find us at ToolboxGenomics.com. So it's Toolbox, everything is one word, and then Genomics, GENOMICS.com. Go on there. You can order any of those tests that we talked about, or actually the one test and any of those products. And then if you have a healthcare professional that you're working with and they want to do a deeper dive with you or with any of their patients, send us an email and they can sign up on our website for the healthcare professional version. So that's for anybody who is licensed, and we would love to help you improve the lives of other patients as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Erika, so much for being here today. I think that we just covered so many amazing things. It was so fun to talk to you.
Thank you for having me, Kylene. It was a lot of fun.